William never imagined he'd be standing in the middle of an abandoned house on Washington Street, holding a crowbar in one hand and his 7-year-old twin son's hands in the other. But life had a way of bringing you to places you never planned to be. It had been 18 months since Hannah left. 18 months since she'd walked out the door with nothing but a suitcase and a note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." The twins, Austin and Kyle, were only 5 then. Too young to understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. Old enough to feel the emptiness she left behind, William had tried to fill that emptiness with routines. Breakfast at 7, school drop-off at 8:15, homework at 4, dinner at 6, bath time at 7:30, stories at 8, lights out by 8:30. Every day, the same pattern, because patterns were safe. Patterns meant no one had time to fall apart. But lately, the patterns weren't enough. The twins had started asking questions he didn't know how to answer. "Dad, why doesn't Mum call us? Dad, did we do something wrong? Dad, will she ever come back?" So, when William's boss mentioned an old Victorian on Washington Street that the company had acquired, a foreclosure, a mess, scheduled for demolition, and asked if William wanted to take a look at it before the bulldozers came, he'd said yes. Maybe working with his hands would quiet his mind. Maybe teaching the boys how to fix something broken would show them that broken things could be made whole again. The house was worse than he'd expected. Peeling wallpaper hung in strips like dead skin. Water stains bloomed across the ceilings. The floors creaked with every step, threatening to give way. But there was something about it, something in the way the afternoon light filtered through the dirty windows, casting golden patterns on the warped floorboards, that made William think of possibility instead of ruin. "Dad, this place is creepy," Austin whispered, pressing closer to William's side. "It's like a haunted house," Kyle added, but his eyes were bright with excitement rather than fear. "It's not haunted," William said, though he wasn't entirely sure. "It's just old. And old things have stories." They started in what must have been the living room. William showed the boys how to carefully pry up the damaged floorboards, explaining how wood expands and contracts, how water damage works, how you could tell the age of a house by the way it was built. The twins listened with the kind of attention children reserve for things that make them feel grown up and important. Austin was the one who found it. "Dad, there's something under here." William set down his crowbar and knelt beside his son. Beneath the floorboards, in the narrow space above the foundation, something pale gleamed in the dusty darkness. He reached in carefully, his fingers closing around cold metal and glass. It was a picture frame, silver, tarnished almost black in places, with an ornate pattern of vines and flowers around the edges. But it was the photograph inside that made William's breath catch. A family portrait, old, judging by the clothing and the sepia tone. A man and a woman stood behind 2 boys who looked to be about 7 or 8. Twins, William realized, just like Austin and Kyle. The woman had her hands on the boy's shoulders. The man stood slightly apart, his expression serious, but one of the boys' faces had been scratched out, not torn or faded, deliberately scratched. The emulsion scraped away in angry, repetitive strokes that had gouged into the paper beneath. "Why is his face gone?" Kyle asked, leaning in to look. "I don't know, buddy," William said softly. "Maybe he was bad," Austin suggested. "Maybe he did something really, really bad, and they didn't want to remember him." William felt a chill run down his spine. He turned the frame over. On the back, written in faded ink, were 4 names. Margaret, Joseph, Thomas, and the 4th name had been crossed out so violently that the paper had torn. "Dad, that's sad," Kyle said quietly. "To be erased like that, like you never existed." William pulled both boys close. "Yeah, it is sad." That night, after the twins were asleep, William couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. He'd brought it home, unable to leave it in that empty house. Now it sat on his kitchen table, that scratched-out face staring up at him, or rather, not staring, because there was no face to stare with. He thought about Hannah, about how, in the months after she left, he'd been tempted to remove her from their family photos. Not to erase her entirely, but to make it easier somehow. To pretend the emptiness had always been there, so it wouldn't hurt so much to see what they'd lost. But he hadn't, because Austin and Kyle needed to remember that their mother had loved them once, even if she'd left, even if he didn't understand why. Over the next few weeks, William and the twins returned to the house on Washington Street every Saturday. What had started as a one-time visit became a project. William told himself it was just a way to stay busy, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. The house had gotten under his skin, its brokenness called to his own. They worked slowly, carefully. William taught the boys how to remove damaged drywall without bringing the whole ceiling down, how to identify which beams were structural and which were decorative, how to see the bones of a place beneath its decay. And as they worked, William found himself telling the twins stories about the scratched-out photograph. He made up elaborate histories for the family. Maybe Thomas and his brother had been adventurers. Maybe they'd built forts in these very rooms. Maybe they'd slid down the banister until their mother scolded them. "What do you think happened to him?" Austin asked one Saturday afternoon as they were pulling up more floorboards in what must have been a bedroom. "The boy whose face got scratched out?" William paused, hammer in hand. It was a question he'd been asking himself. "I don't know. Maybe he ran away. Maybe the family lost touch with him and they were angry about it." "That's sad," Kyle said. "Being so mad at someone that you want to erase them." "Yeah," William agreed quietly. "It is." That day, beneath those bedroom floorboards, they found more. A small wooden box containing a tarnished pocket watch, a bundle of letters tied with string, and a child's toy soldier, one arm broken off. William opened the box carefully. The letters were so old that the paper crumbled at his touch, but he could make out fragments. "My dearest Margaret, I am writing to tell you that Joseph, the boy, refuses to—" "What do they say?" Austin asked eagerly. William scanned the fragile pages, his heart sinking as the story pieced itself together in fragments. I think Thomas ran away, and his parents spent years looking for him." "Did they find him?" "I don't know." But William kept reading. That night, after the boys were in bed, he sat at his kitchen table with the letters spread before him, using tweezers and a magnifying glass to decipher the faded ink. The story that emerged broke his heart. Thomas and his twin brother, the other boy in the photo, whose face remained intact, had been inseparable. But when they were 12, something happened. An accident. The brother had drowned in a swimming hole. Thomas had been with him but couldn't save him. The parents, Margaret and Joseph, had been consumed by grief, and in their grief they'd blamed Thomas. Not explicitly, perhaps, but the mother couldn't look at him without seeing the son she'd lost. The father couldn't speak to him without anger creeping into his voice, so Thomas had run away. At 16, he'd left a note and disappeared into the world. The letters were Margaret's attempts to find him. Letters to police departments, to friends, to distant relatives. "Have you seen my son? Please, if he's with you, tell him we forgive him. Tell him to come home." But Thomas never came home, and at some point, William couldn't tell when, Margaret's grief had curdled into something harder. The loving mother who'd written those desperate letters had become someone who scratched her son's face from the family portrait and hid it beneath the floorboards. William sat back, tears streaming down his face. He thought about Hannah, about how he'd blamed her for leaving, resented her for breaking their family, about how that resentment had started to harden into something darker. And he thought about Austin and Kyle and what they must feel when they saw the way his expression changed whenever Hannah's name was mentioned. the way he tensed up during phone calls with her parents, the way he'd stopped displaying photos of her around the house. Was he erasing her just like Margaret had erased Thomas? The next Saturday, something unexpected happened. William and the twins arrived at the house to find an elderly man standing on the porch. He was thin, stooped with age, with white hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a cardigan despite the warm weather, and he leaned heavily on a cane. "Can I help you?" William asked, instinctively stepping in front of the twins. The old man smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I'm sorry to intrude. I saw your car here the last few Saturdays. I live just down the street. This was my family's house, a very long time ago. I was wondering, would you mind if I took one last look before it's torn down?" William's heart began to pound. "What's your name?" "Thomas," the old man said. "Thomas Brennan. I grew up in this house, left when I was 16 and never came back. Heard it was finally being demolished and thought, well, I thought I should see it one more time, make my peace with it." William couldn't breathe. Austin and Kyle pressed against his legs, sensing something significant was happening. "Mr. Brennan," William said slowly, "I think you should come inside." They sat in what remained of the living room, William, the twins, and Thomas Brennan. The old photograph lay between them, that scratched-out face somehow present in its absence. Thomas picked up the frame with shaking hands. He stared at it for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "My brother died when we were 12, he said quietly. "Samuel. We were swimming in the creek and he got caught in the current. I tried to grab him, but I wasn't strong enough. I watched him go under." Austin and Kyle were silent, listening with the solemn attention children give to painful truths. "My parents. They didn't mean to blame me, but grief does strange things to people. My mother couldn't look at me without crying. My father worked longer and longer hours to avoid being home. I felt like a ghost in my own house. So I left." "Where did you go?" Kyle asked softly. "West," Thomas said. "I worked on ranches and factories, anywhere that would take a kid who was too young to be on his own. Eventually, I made a life for myself, got married, had children of my own. But I never came back here, never tried to contact my parents." "Why not?" Austin asked. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Fear, mostly. I was afraid they wouldn't want me, afraid they'd blame me, afraid I'd see hatred in my mother's eyes. It seemed easier to just stay away." "But they looked for you," William said gently. "Your mother wrote letters. She wanted you to come home." Thomas's head snapped up. "What?" William carefully pulled out the bundle of letters. "We found these under the floorboards. Your mother spent years trying to find you." Thomas took the letters with trembling hands. As he read, tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. "I didn't know," he whispered. I thought they wanted to forget I existed." "I think maybe she did for a while," William said carefully. "The photo, someone scratched out your face. I think the grief and anger got to be too much and she hid it all away. But before that, she searched for you. She wanted you back." Thomas wept. Not the quiet tears of before, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and wounded inside him. Austin moved first, walking over and putting his small hand on the old man's knee. Kyle followed, and soon both twins were standing beside Thomas, offering the uncomplicated comfort that children give so naturally. "You weren't erased," Austin said seriously. "You were just lost for a while." When Thomas finally composed himself, he looked at William with red-rimmed eyes. "Why are you here? In this old place?" William hesitated, then told him. About Hannah leaving, about trying to hold his family together, about finding the photograph and becoming obsessed with this broken house and its broken family. "I think I saw myself in this place," William admitted. "All this damage, all this history, that needed to be dealt with instead of hidden away. I've been so angry at my ex-wife, so focused on what she broke when she left. I was starting to erase her from our story, just like someone erased you from yours. Thomas nodded slowly. Anger is easier than grief. Erasing someone is easier than dealing with the hole they left behind, but neither one brings peace. No, William agreed quietly. No, it doesn't. Thomas stayed for hours. He walked through the house with them, pointing out where his bed had been, where he and Samuel had played, where his mother had kept her garden. He told stories that made the empty rooms come alive with memory. And then he did something that surprised William. He asked for a photograph. "One of all of us," Thomas said. "You, your boys, and me, here in this house. I want to remember that I came back, that I wasn't erased after all." They took the photo on William's phone. 4 people standing in the ruins of a house that had held so much pain and so much love. When William looked at it later, he thought it was one of the most important pictures he'd ever taken. Before Thomas left, he pressed something into William's hand. It was the pocket watch they'd found under the floorboards. "This was my father's," Thomas said. "He gave it to me on my 12th birthday. I left it behind when I ran away because I didn't want anything that connected me to this place. But I think—" He looked at Austin and Kyle. "I think your boys should have it. Time keeps moving forward, even when we're stuck in the past. Remember that." After Thomas left, William sat on the porch with his sons. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Dad," Austin said quietly, "are you going to erase Mom?" William's throat tightened. He pulled both boys close. "No," he said firmly. "No, I'm not. Mom made choices that hurt us, that's true, but she also gave me you two, and that's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. I won't erase her from our story. She's part of who you are." "Even if she left?" Kyle asked. "Even if she left. People are complicated, guys. Sometimes they do things we don't understand. Sometimes they carry pain that's too heavy, and they handle it in ways that hurt other people. That doesn't mean we have to hate them. It doesn't mean we have to pretend they never existed." "Like Thomas's family did?" Austin asked. "Exactly like that. Thomas's mother was so hurt by losing one son that she pushed away the other one, and then she was so angry at herself and at him that she tried to erase him completely. But all that did was leave everyone broken and alone." They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade. "Dad," Kyle said finally, "I'm glad we found that picture. I'm glad Thomas came back." "Me too, buddy, me too." The next week, William did something he'd been avoiding for 18 months. He called Hannah. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice wary. "William?" "Hi, Hannah." He took a deep breath. "I'm not calling to fight. I want to tell you something." He told her about the house, about the photograph, about Thomas Brennan and 70 years of regret, about how close he'd come to erasing her from Austin and Kyle's lives. "I've been angry," he said quietly. "So angry, and that anger was starting to poison everything, but I don't want our sons to grow up with a scratched-out hole where their mother should be. You left, and that hurt us, but you're still their mom. They still love you, and I think they need to know that it's okay to love you, even though you're not here." Hannah was crying on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry, William. I was drowning. I felt like I was failing at everything, being a wife, being a mother, being myself. I thought leaving would make it easier for everyone." "It didn't," William said honestly. "But I'm trying to understand that you were in pain too. And I'm trying to show the boys that people can be complicated and make mistakes and still be worthy of love." They talked for over an hour. It wasn't a reconciliation. Too much had broken for that, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that they could both be flawed and human and still be good parents to their children. When William told Austin and Kyle that they'd be having regular video calls with their mom starting next week, the relief on their faces nearly broke his heart. "Really?" Austin asked, his eyes shining. "Really? And maybe, when school's out for summer, you can visit her for a week or two?" Both boys launched themselves at him, hugging him so tight he could barely breathe. "Thank you, Dad," Kyle whispered. "Thank you for not erasing her." The house on Washington Street was demolished the following month. William and the twins stood across the street and watched the bulldozers tear down the walls, the roof, the porch where Thomas had stood after 70 years away. But before the demolition, William had done one thing. He'd carefully removed the mantelpiece from the living room, the one with the ornate carvings, the one that had survived decades of neglect. He'd restored it, refinished it, made it beautiful again. And now it hung in their own living room, a reminder that broken things could be made whole, that hidden things could be brought into the light. That erasure was never the answer. The old family photograph sat on that mantelpiece now, but William had done something with it. He'd taken it to a restoration specialist who'd carefully repaired the damaged face, using old family photos that Thomas had provided. The boy whose face had been scratched out now looked out at the world again, his features clear, his existence acknowledged. Next to it, William had placed a photo of his own family, himself, Austin, Kyle, and yes, Hannah. All of them together, before everything fell apart. He didn't look at that photo with pain anymore. He looked at it with acceptance. This was their story, the complicated truth of who they'd been and who they'd become, the love and the loss, the joy and the grief, all woven together into something real. Thomas visited often after that. He became a fixture in their lives, an honorary grandfather who told stories and taught the boys how to play chess, and sometimes just sat quietly with William on the porch, two men who understood what it meant to heal from old wounds. One evening, as they sat watching the twins play in the yard, Thomas said, "You saved my life, you know." William looked at him in surprise. "What?" "Coming back here, facing what I'd run from, I thought it would destroy me, but instead it freed me. You gave me that, you and your boys. You reminded me that it's never too late to stop running, never too late to forgive, even if it's just forgiving yourself." William thought about the man he'd been 18 months ago, brittle with anger, building walls instead of bridges. "I think you saved mine too," he said quietly. As autumn turned to winter, William noticed something. The patterns that had once felt like prison bars now felt like rhythms. The routines weren't about avoiding pain anymore. They were about creating stability, about showing Austin and Kyle that even when life breaks apart, you can build something new from the pieces. The twins video called Hannah every Sunday now. Sometimes the calls were awkward. Sometimes the boys didn't know what to say. But they showed up week after week, maintaining the connection. And sometimes when William overheard them laughing with their mother about something silly, his heart hurt a little less. On Christmas Eve, William did something he'd been planning for weeks. He called Thomas and asked him to come over. When the old man arrived, William handed him a box. "What's this?" Thomas asked. "Open it." Inside was a photograph, the restored family portrait, professionally printed and framed. But William had done something special. He'd had it printed twice, and in the second frame he'd placed a current photo of Thomas, taken just last month. Same pose, same serious expression, but 70 years older. The caption beneath read, "Thomas Brennan, found again." Thomas stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at William with tears in his eyes. "How did you—" "You weren't erased," William said softly. "You were never erased. You were just waiting to be found." That night, after the twins were asleep and Thomas had gone home, William stood in front of the mantelpiece and looked at the photographs. The old family with all its tragedy and loss, his own family with all its complications and broken pieces. Thomas, young and old, erased and restored. And he understood something he hadn't known when he'd first walked into that crumbling house on Washington Street. Healing wasn't about forgetting the pain. It wasn't about erasing the people who'd hurt you or pretending the damage didn't exist. Healing was about acknowledgement, about looking at the broken places with honest eyes and saying, yes, this happened. Yes, it hurt. And yes, I'm going to keep going anyway. It was about teaching your children that love and loss could exist in the same space, that anger was natural, but erasure was a choice, that the people who hurt you could still be worthy of compassion, even if they couldn't be part of your life anymore. William thought about Margaret, hiding that photograph beneath the floorboards, trying to bury her grief and guilt where no one would find it. He thought about Thomas, running away from his pain and spending 70 years as a ghost in his own life. He thought about Hannah, drowning in her own struggles and making the hardest choice she'd ever made. And he thought about himself and his boys, learning to build a life that honored the truth of their story, all of it, the beautiful and the broken parts together. The house on Washington Street was gone now, reduced to an empty lot. But the lessons it had taught them remained, written not in wood and plaster, but in the careful way William now spoke about Hannah to the boys, in the regular video calls that kept their family connected, even when it was apart, in the old man who'd found his way home after 70 years, in the photograph on the mantelpiece with all its faces restored. Some things stayed broken, some relationships couldn't be fixed. But William had learned that you didn't have to erase the broken parts to make room for healing. You just had to give them space to exist, acknowledged, accepted, and slowly, carefully woven into the larger story of who you were becoming. On New Year's Eve, William stood on his porch with Austin and Kyle, watching fireworks bloom across the sky. Thomas stood beside them, his hand on William's shoulder. "Dad," Austin asked, "what are you going to do with the empty lot, where the house used to be?" William smiled. He'd been thinking about that. "I talked to the company. They're going to let the community decide. Maybe a park, maybe a garden, maybe just a green space where kids can play." "Something new," Kyle said thoughtfully. "Something new," William agreed. "Built on the foundation of something old. Just like us." As the fireworks painted the sky in brilliant colors, William felt something shift in his chest. Not happiness exactly. It was too soon for that, too complicated. But something lighter, something that felt like hope. He pulled his boys close and thought about the year ahead, about Hannah and the careful relationship they were building, about Thomas and the friendship that had saved them both, about the empty lot on Washington Street and what would grow there, about faces that couldn't be erased no matter how hard you tried, about foundations that held even when everything else fell apart, about the choice made every single day to acknowledge the pain without letting it destroy you. The fireworks burst overhead, brilliant and brief, each one a small act of transformation. Darkness into light, silence into sound, ending into beginning. And William thought, yes, this is how healing happens. Not all at once, not perfectly, not without setbacks and scars, but moment by moment, choice by choice, building something new on the foundation of what came before, together. So that's the story of William, Austin, Kyle, and the face that was scratched out but never really erased. It's about the things we try to bury, the pain we try to forget, and the incredible strength it takes to face the truth instead. I'd love to know, where are you watching this from right now? Are you sitting in your own house, maybe looking at your own family photos and thinking about the stories they tell? What did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone you've been trying to forget, or someone you've been afraid to forgive? And here's the real question. What lesson are you taking away from this? Is it that healing takes time, that anger is easier than grief, that the people we love can hurt us and still deserve compassion, or maybe something else entirely, something personal that this story touched in you. Drop a comment below and let me know. I read every single one, and your stories, your perspectives, your lessons, they matter. They add to this conversation we're all having about what it means to be human and broken and still trying. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or remember something important, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Every week, I share stories like this, about ordinary people facing extraordinary pain and finding their way through to the other side. Stories about healing, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to keep your heart open even when it's been broken. Because none of us are erased, not really. We're all just waiting to be found, to be seen, to be welcomed back into the light. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the broken places don't define you. What you build from them does.